The first track is called Miami, and we have to discuss it, right? Because this is a totally pioneering bit of electro.
You know, it sounds like something from Kid A.
Exactly the note I've got here. It's so far ahead of its time. It's like it's down there is preempting a lot of IDM, intelligent dance music. The percussion and bass on it, as you say, feels like Kid A, Amnesiac era Radiohead, and actually on into Tom York's solo career. And there's no exaggeration there. It really does sound like that.
Hey folks, welcome to Unsung podcast. My name is Mark.
I'm still Chris.
He's still Chris. Always going to be Chris forever, Chris.
There's no guarantees of that.
There is a guarantee of that.
No.
No? You might
I
change
could
your
be
name.
Chris with a K.
You could be. Well, that's very... getting right to it. Right to it, aye.
Mate. It's almost like I've been doing this for 8 years.
What is that reference to?
That's a reference to the album that we're going to cover this week by the band Krisma.
Krisma?
Who used to be spelled Chrisma, and I then changed it to Krisma for no definite reason that I'm aware of, unless the Italian Wikipedia.
No, it was just the 80s, I think. Just because originally that Krisma
Wikipedia.
Originally Krisma was like a portmanteau, right, of our names.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, and then fuck that, just K. Just use a K instead.
Because it's cooler.
Yeah.
I read some description say it was because it entered the computer age. It's like, yeah, that's exactly when K started getting used. So we're going to, I mean, the world's a pretty tough place right now. We're going to seek to stick our heads in the sand if the sand is a near 50-year-old Italian new wave post-punk album.
Yeah, it's a
bit of a deep cut.
Different era for sure.
Yeah. But it's a deep cut for us.
It's kind of a deep cut in general, unless you're Italian.
Unless you're Fario.
Yeah.
So our good friend Fario, who will be joining us on a future episode, but we couldn't pass up the chance to ask him what he thought about this week's choice. And this week's choice is the album Chinese Restaurant by Krisma. And Fario was kind of over the moon. I don't think I heard of this band via Fario. I think it was like an obscure kind of algorithmic kind of coughing up based on some stuff I was digging through, but it very much met with his approval. So Fario has actually submitted a wee message that we'll cut to later. He knows quite a lot about this band, it turns out, but he's abbreviated it in a series of messages where he whittled it down each time into a more nutritious information capsule.
Dense.
Which, to be like a pessary, to be crammed up your butt halfway through this episode. But yeah, Krisma from this album's from 1977. We do subject you to quite a lot of post-punk, despite the fact you are on record as saying you dislike post-punk. How did you feel about that?
I don't know.
Targeted,
offended. No, I don't. This is one of the deepest cuts we've had for a while.
Yeah.
And it seems I wasn't really being entirely jokey when I said that nobody outside of Italy seems to really know about this band. Like there's a dearth of information online about these guys, unless you go to the Italian Wikipedia page.
Yeah, I didn't know this.
Which is nutrient rich as well.
You went to the Italian wiki and it's absolutely hoaching with info.
It is totally. It's got sources for books and stuff like that. It's wild.
Brilliant. I wonder if Ferro's quoted on it. He's
maybe
an academic.
Yes, yeah, could be. Or if he isn't, then he should be soon. I think this was interesting because this band are kind of interesting.
This band's more interesting than I knew they were when I nominated them.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
There was names that came up in the research. I was like, holy shit. Didn't expect to see that lad.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll just get into the basics of it. We'll do the admin at the end. Unsung Pod.
Yep, like I said,
just like
if you're watching us on YouTube, which is this will be like our second episode proper on YouTube, like our 5th or 6th or whatever the fuck video. I need to stop swearing, by the way, for YouTube. But yeah, like I said, like, share, subscribe, drop a comments, let us know throughout this episode what you think. We do actually respond to comments, probably because our channel's so small. A lot of channels will go like and subscribe and all that and comment, but never really reply to comments.
No, we'll say hate and unsubscribe.
Yeah, but yeah, and then hit the bell. So you always get a notification when our new episodes come out, which is good.
That is now a thing we can say.
It's quite handy, yeah.
Right, okay. So Chrisma launched as a project in Milan in 1976. It's made up of two people, a husband and wife duo, Maurizio Arcieri and Christina Moser. She's Swiss by nationality. They fall between a few categories at various points in their career. They sound slightly different, but new wave, post-punk, little bits of electropop. They do a wee bit of krautrock. I mean, they do some early on. They really sound quite 60s when they really first come out. We'll talk about that shortly. There's some big names going to appear, as we mentioned. One of them is not Peter Maben, who I'm not familiar with, but Hans Zimmer. Certainly is. These were both guys that took part in the band at various points, and there's another big one to drop later on. I'll also make reference to an article that I did find in Rolling Stone Italy, which was really good, from 2022, and it's their worst to best albums list. Love a good worst to best albums list. They're a band that actually, you probably encountered this, right? So if you go on a streaming site, you'll get one selection of albums. If you go on the English language version of their Wikipedia, you get a different selection of albums, neither of which are comprehensive. You then go on YouTube, you can sort of find the deeper cuts, because, that's one thing YouTube has proven really good for, is the fact that we can all upload stuff to try and make sure it's out there. So if you hear something and you can't see it on the streaming services, then you're probably going to have to go and look up on YouTube or go bin diving in your local charity shop. By the way, if you find some of these records, they're actually worth a wee bit of money. There's one in particular that they tried to wipe from existence, but it got out there. And if you get hold of one, there's probably some Italian new wave aficionado that'll part with a number of lira. But anyway, we'll talk about Maurizio first, Maurizio Arcieri, because he wasn't just a member of this band. Prior to that, he was something of a big deal. So he was a member of the New Dada, from 1962 to about 1966. They were part of what they call the Italian beat scene in the mid-60s, which was mainly just inspired by the music that was coming out of Britain at the time. That was, the toast of the town. Everybody trying to sound like one of these bands. They supported the Beatles in Milan in 1965. They actually ended up splitting, I think it was early 67, due to, quote, creative tensions. Some of the members left and formed a band or a project. It was one of those projects where they've got 5 people's names all in a row. They supported Rolling Stones and then also broke up. And the other members more or less transitioned into a role as Maurizio's backing group. He became the focus of it. Maurizio met Christina at a party in 1966 and they got together. Apparently, due to his role as a bit of a sex symbol, pop icon, they kept the relationship and the marriage a secret, but then they must have got tired of lying, because they debuted the duo Krisma in 1976 at the RAI TV Festival Bar, which was the biggest Italian music show at the time for maximum exposure. Coming out the closet, sorry girls, I'm married, and here she is. Isn't that nice, by the way? You're thinking about, I've got a new project. Let's say, Mark, we start a new hardcore thing. We'll get Craig involved, because goodness knows he's always looking for something to do. Let's go on the biggest show in the country just to tell people we've started a new project. How about that?
Yeah, that's
just phone somebody up.
Yeah, just phone.
I play my first gig. Can I come?
Jules, we'll just get Jules on the phone.
Hey, Jules, we do our first show. Just a wee warm up set. Yeah. So
scare the crowd away before everybody else starts.
Maurizio was part of an event called Disco per l'Estate, also known as St. Vincent Estate, which was a kind of competition from, I think it's been 1964, that ran all the way into the early 2000s. It was intended to stimulate summer record sales in Italy. A bit like Eurovision, they eliminated various songs and submissions round by round. Maurizio had a song called Cinque Minuti e Poi, and that became the biggest hit of the year, and ended up being part of a successful movie called We Are the Beautiful Ones, which he also appears in. So his star was in the rise in the late 60s, early 70s. He released a solo album called Transparenze in 1973, which is it's a really interesting album, actually. It's far from just some kind of corny Italian sort of pop, mainstream 60s, 70s pop. It's kind of proggy rock, and it's seen as being quite an experimental venture. Not bad at all, really. It's got some good loose feeling, sort of slightly jazzy 70s stuff in it. No big hooks, but worth a look. And Maurizio was also part of, there was a project, it was kind of a pan-European remake of Peter and the Wolf.
Yeah, I read about this.
And this project included Manfred Mann, Brian Eno, Phil Collins, and it was Maurizio that voiced the Italian version of that project. So, as we said, came out the closet with Krisma in 1976. Krisma at this point was spelled Chrisma. You made the point, it's kind of a portmanteau of Chris as in Christina, and I can't tell if it's Ma as in Maurizio, M-A, or his initials, Maurizio Arcieri. It's one of the two, but Krisma. Married couple, yep, as we said. After some early singles, they moved together to London to sort of develop the band a wee bit. They took on a guy called Anthony Fawcett as their manager, and he'd formerly, albeit briefly, worked with people like John Lennon and Yoko Ono. They recorded 2 singles in London, You and Amore. Amore was released as I think it's a double A with a song called Sweet Baby Sue, 1976, and it sounds nothing like the music we're going to go on to describe here today. It's sort of, the best way I could think to describe it was porno pop, right? It's just a slight kind of sexy, slow, really like playing up Christina's allure. I mean, she's a really good looking woman and very confident, as becomes apparent across their career in videos. It's also got this wee synth line in it, a quote whistled. I mean, it's a fake whistle, but it's a hook that I think surely must have been sampled. It really put me in mind of kind of slower I don't know, maybe contemporary acts like Fatima Yamaha. I mean, I don't know if you actually know the name there, but I think if I played one of their better known tracks, you would get it. The other single that they recorded in London was You, as in the letter U, and there was a part 1 and a part 2. Again, more weird kind of porno pop. It's got this super sexy faux brass solo in it.
Yeah.
Quite amazingly, by the way, Polydor Records decided to reissue that as a split single, right? With the track It's Alright by Black Sabbath.
What?
It is such a when you listen to it, it's such a bizarre combination.
Yes,
right? That came out in 77 as a split record. There you go.
And the Italian Wikipedia page, it says that these
Ciao, Mark.
these early singles had a disco sound influence.
By the way, I just want to say I've got Italian family, so that's not racist, okay? I am entitled to belittle my own people.
These early singles had a disco music sound influenced by the popular sexy sound style launched by Donna Summer.
Oh, yeah.
This makes sense.
Yeah, sexy sound. Who doesn't like that? So Chinese Restaurant, the album we're talking about, came out in 1977. But I think before we start digging too far into their discography, let's cut to our friend Ferruccio Quirchetti, the professor of punk, isn't he?
PhD, for sure.
See what he's got to say about this.
I'm really glad that Chris chose Chinese Restaurant by Krisma as his record of the week. I think that album and also its follow-up, Hibernation from 1979, those two are two great like punk / new wave / electronic albums. And Krisma in general as a group are one of continental Europe's best kept secrets when it comes to new wave punk and post-punk. They were pretty brilliant and creative. They have a strange history, an extravagant history as a band. Maurizio Arcieri, he used to be a pop star in the 60s. He fronted the band New Dada and then had a solo career as well. So when punk arrived, he embraced it. He had next to grind towards the Italian record industry, and so he really embraced punk rock criticism of the music business, and he was really sincere and earnest about his love for punk rock, to the point that he even cut his finger in one live performance in order to show people that he was real. But besides these acts, these gestures, he really helped a lot of Italian punk bands with with equipment and a musical gear in order to get them started. So it was a good soul, and together with his wife Christina Moser, they created very interesting music that should be discovered by everyone who's following Unsung, in general by everyone all over the world who enjoys new wave electronics, synth pop, punk rock in general. The first three albums, I really recommend them all, and I hope you will enjoy Chinese Restaurant. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about one of my favorite bands from that era. I am Ferruccio Quercetti from Bologna, Italy.
As I said, Ferruccio, very pleased that we were covering this subject. And Maurizio sounds like just such a character as well. I do kind of feel a little bit bad for him coming from that slightly corny mainstream success, wanting to be taken seriously. Like Fario says, he seems to have a very positive reputation as a bit of a philanthropist, a real champion of the Milan punk scene as well. Maybe part of like trying to compensate by trying really hard to be supportive, to demonstrate how earnest he was about the movement.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you see the number of records that this band put out, the amount of effort they put into it, the originality of some of what they do. I think it's really hard to think that he wasn't sincere, that he was LARPing as a punk. No, I think it really does seem like he took to that. He really connected with it. And yeah, seems like a total dude. We should maybe comment more on the little anecdote that Ferruccio just related about the finger. So in 1978, during the promo tour for Chinese Restaurant, Maurizio responded to criticism by cutting his finger with a razor blade. There's different versions of this cutting about, pardon the pun. What had you heard?
So on a Wikipedia page, the Italian one, not the English one. The English one is citations needed all over the shop, and this story isn't in it. But this actually says that he chopped his finger off, and it cites two different sources from 1978 saying that actually happened. News stories, and then he had to go and get plastic surgery on his finger to basically put the tendons back together. The second part's probably true, regardless of which version of the story is correct.
I think it was the Italian Rolling Stone article said that basically this was the result of a kind of Chinese whispers thing, that he did badly cut his finger on stage, and there was a whole mess of blood. Like Fario says as well, that kind of grew arms and legs, again, pardon the pun, but that the story just sort of snowballed. But
I don't think it happened, like.
Oh, but I mean, it caused him any scandal, and the tour got cancelled, I'd imagine, because he did do himself a mischief and either found it hard to play or just couldn't play. But yeah, there was a scene, but pretty soon he'll be chopping off his own head.
Yeah, I mean, it probably didn't happen in the sense that he chopped up his finger. He obviously did cut something, but two contemporary sources kind of corroborate it, which is weird. Doesn't mean to say it's true, obviously, but Ferruccio maybe has better sources, more knowledge than we do.
I mean, he's a prof.
Yeah, so
punk prof.
Interesting nonetheless.
So they followed that. We'll obviously come back in more detail to Chinese Restaurant, but it was followed by Hibernation in 1979. Now, they were still Krisma with a CH at this point. Rolling Stone, Italy, rates this very highly. It placed at number 2 in their list. They cite it for introducing, quote, cyber rock and making ground before bands like Sieg Sputnik came along and were really praised for their sound. It was also really rated by Ferruccio. He's a big fan of this one. Personally, I'm not really all that on board with this album. It does have a lot of similarities to Chinese Restaurant in terms of the palette, the canvas of different colours and shapes and sounds and textures that they've used, but it doesn't have. I mean, Chinese Restaurant, spoiler alert, has just a few really strong tracks that I think solidify it, cement it, give it a bit of weight. This one didn't have anything that really made me want to go back and listen to it. The first one on it, I think, to be fair, I hate the first track, but it does seem to be sort of roundly considered a bit of a false start to the album. It's called Calling. It's weird and it's ploddy and it's pretty naff, and I'm not really sure what the creative decision was behind putting it on first here. But the second one, Aurora B, this one caused a bit of a fuss, not least because the promotional video for it simulated sex and suicide. Yeah. It's a pretty interesting tune. It blends some of that early 70s sort of like porno pop that I was talking about with some new wave vibes. Actually, they're quite a racy band. you know, they seem a bit tongue in cheek
Mhm.
at points, a bit corny. But there's an interview that I saw on YouTube later on where Maurizio's getting interviewed in the dressing room, and Christina's just behind a glass panel behind them getting naked. Like, that's it, and they're just doing it, and there's no problem. I mean, they do seem to have like a pure sexual edge to them, and you know, some of the songs will reflect that. The fifth one in this, Got, that's double T, Got
Oh,
Electron.
I was going to say, I did. I'd actually quite liked Aurora B. It sounded a bit like Bowie to me,
Yeah.
you know, which is a reference that comes in a few times, I think. And I would actually be surprised. There is a big name, which I think we're gonna have to spoil at this point.
Is
but
that getting whipped out?
it has to be because it's the exact same production personnel as the
Mhm.
first record.
Yep.
So there is. So the first record and the second record are produced by Vangelis' brother,
Yeah.
Nico. I'm not even going to try and pronounce
Yeah,
his
so
surname.
Nico Papathanasiou and
Yeah.
his brother Evangelos Odysseus Papathanasiou, who
Yeah.
went on to be known as Vangelis.
Vangelis, yeah, and
Who, I mean, if you don't know who Vangelis is, Blade Runner.
yeah,
Blade Runner.
Blade Runner. Like they're certainly using his synths. They're using his equipment because it sounds like it. There are rumours that are unsubstantiated because nobody will confirm or deny if he actually played on the record.
Oh no, apparently he did. Apparently he's uncredited, but he
is
does it
uncredited.
on Chinese Restaurant as well.
The engineer who worked on both the records would, and when interviewed, is said, I can neither confirm nor deny if Vangelis played in it. As Bella said, he didn't. Those were the two sources that I could find that were actually involved in the room with a band. I think he probably did because it sounds like he's on this fucking song. It sounds like he's on Aurora B. Like,
is this you not swearing?
yeah, just me trying not to swear and failing. It's kind of laid back, kind of jaunty. It feels almost like chamber pop in places as well. It's an interesting tune, man. But the next one you mentioned, God Got Electron.
Got Electron, yeah,
Um,
double T. Fifth track in this, really nice stompy punk track
Yeah.
with some good vocal hooks
Yeah,
on it.
mhm.
And the seventh one, so you don't. I can understand why Fario likes these songs. They're really snarly, punky wee raspers. You know, they've
Mhm.
got a bit of pace to them. I mean, I like the energy of them. I don't think they're the best tunes in the world, but they do mix the album up as well and avoid it becoming one dimensional. I think Hibernation has some cool ideas and it's got some good moments, but as I say, it didn't have a real listenability.
Yeah, I think for me, So You Don't, We Are, and Lover are the other songs stuck out to me because they kind of feel as though they've refined that punk sound that they kind of had on the first record. Like the guitar tones are better,
Yeah.
production's generally better on it. I actually think that Lover's got a kind of Stooges vibe to it, which is cool. But I think Got Electron is probably the best song on the record.
Yeah,
It's got
probably.
the catchiest melody as well.
Yeah.
I was interested. I thought this record it definitely feels like an evolution, like sonically, but it's not got the same urgency to it, which happens a lot of times when bands start getting better,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, they change it up again. So the name, first of all, changes to Krisma with a K after that record. And they bring out Cathode Mama in 1980. Again, features Hans Zimmer on this one.
Zimmer.
So some of this album works really well. They've done reasonably well at this point,
Yeah,
right?
this is their most successful record as
Yeah,
well.
and so they gravitate towards the mainstream a little bit. The sound softens and gets a bit lusher and a bit more commercial. I'm not surprised that the album works well, given that they've got someone like Hans Zimmer on keys in this. That just brings a bit of panache to it. Rolling Stone in their list ranked it fifth, but acknowledged the fun, I think, that the bands sound like they're having. And they also said it was quite a savvy move, you know, in terms of this was the era of commercial TV tie-ins, and they really put themselves in a position to maximise that in Italy.
I've got some interesting trivia here from the old Italian Wikipedia.
Do it.
If you want it. So it's a concept album about visual arts, which was basically TV, which was so visual arts was really prevalent at the time. And it kind of focused on an apocalypse caused by TV's influence on society, which is pretty interesting. The album sounds like a synth pop record. It does like totally change direction. The quote here says it's moving away from the metropolitan and electric sounds of the previous work. Electric guitars are replaced by two electric basses, which is interesting. Didn't know that. He abandoned Vangelis and his brother, and moved and worked with Jack Lancaster in Trident Studios in London. And yeah, Hans Zimmer was a band member, but left because he didn't want to play live. So he was only in the band for a year, really. Many Kisses was their biggest single.
Yeah.
And it's probably the best song on the record.
Did well in Europe as well, yeah. I mean, I think it's a patchy album, but I think that's kind of their MO in general. That's sort of the thing. The high points in this one, I think, sound quite like Devo. There's a lot of Devo energy to it, and there's a few I would put in that category. Given this is 1980 as well, I think there's something we should point out here. It gets a lot right about the sounds that would go on to define the 80s for bands, in particular like the Human League.
Yeah.
Now, the Human League were still a year away from releasing their kind of big breakout album, Dare, that had like Don't You Want Me Baby and stuff on. And yes, a lot of this is probably down to Hans Zimmer being such a visionary with his tones and things. But this album is a full year ahead of things that would go on to become the defining sound of 80s pop over here. That's pretty impressive stuff.
It is. For me, the biggest reference point I had for this record was Gary Newman.
Yeah, aye. Also, the fact
ahead.
that Maurizio starts to look like him
He does, it's true.
in all the shots.
But he was that was 79, 80 for him as well.
Yeah.
So they are the progenitors of this sound.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's much more well regarded as being the person who kind of created that sound, or that synth poppy gothy sound.
That's because we're Western centric, though. I
Yeah,
mean,
totally.
like, European bands have always probably laboured under that sort of like elitism. You
Absolutely.
know, probably a lot of European bands came up with sounds and then saw it attributed to somebody just because they were based in London.
Yeah, and ABBA did it with the Visitors as well. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? So the vocals in places sound like Susie and the Banshees in this record, which is again borrowing post. Like, they've been around for not very long at this point. I think they'd only released one record, and it was two records, and they were definitely not messing around with electronics and stuff like that. But that point,
Maurizio and Christina were in London,
yeah, they would
like
have
surrounded by the punk scene.
probably known them.
Yeah, and there's no getting away for the sheer impact that had on them, in particular him, moving him away from that 60s stodge that he was doing, and really, like, he really seemed to engage with it musically. I don't think it was cynical.
White Knife is the other great song on that record. It's really poppy. It's got prominent guitar riff in the chorus, kind of meandering verses, but it's got a fun energy, and it's got bleeps and blips in it, which are in a few of the songs in this record.
One thing we didn't say, Many Kisses apparently describes a particularly surreal trip they took to uber-communist Albania. That's what that song's about. There's some tracks on this, like the third track, Peggy Guggenheim, which I think are pretty abysmal. There's a bit, the Ooga Booga Booga bit, which is twee to the point of just being infuriating. It feels like maybe a misjudged bit of levity on their part. The fourth one on it, R-Rock. Now, they've done C-Rock on a Chinese Restaurant, but R-Rock, by contrast, I think it's one of the best. Again, upbeat Devo style synthy pop rock. The sixth one, Cathode Mama, I think this one tries to be a bit darker and sexier, and that's where you really hear that Human League, or what would become the Human League sound.
That's
really
a cool
strong
song, that
Yeah.
one. Wee bit of trivia here. So after this time, or around about this time, they actually collaborated with Vangelis on one of his records and sang on the song Suffocation from his album See You Later. So even though they stopped working with him, they clearly still had some relationship.
No bad feelings.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
So they left Polygram in 1981 and moved to a label called CGD. And bearing in mind they'd had their most successful commercial track in Many Kisses, they were sort of the toast of the town in some circles. Apparently, well, maybe more so for the two albums prior, but albeit they were visitors to London and sort of taking lessons out of the punk scene and what they were seeing, but they actually left their own imprint on that scene. Like, supposedly they did cause a bit of a stir, this duo from Italy. People were like, man, they're really pretty good. So they went from being students, you know, to something much more in that time. So from this point, there is a lot of options open to them, right? They've just had the most commercial record. As I say, they've got a sound that is not a million miles away from Human League, who are about to explode over here. What are they going to do, I wonder? Well, the first thing they do is they apparently invent some wee machine called the Krismino.
Yep.
So, again, a accounts vary on this, but I've seen it written in a couple of places that around this time they developed a mini sequencer, which was one of the first, if not the first, mini sequencers. Called it the Krisma. I've not been able to verify that, but in terms of self-contained sequencer units, you could. I mean, you could take that back to the 40s, I'm sure, if you were really trying. But as opposed to the sort of huge PC contraptions that were about in the 70s, where they were basically running off a fucking massive computer, the first sort of self-contained thing, Roland commercially released a thing called the MSQ 700 in 1982, which, yeah, as I say, in some quarters is seen as being the first. Why, when the first sequencer released, is suddenly called the 700? I don't know. Why can't it just be the MSQ one? But there you go.
Roland are really, really, really well known for having the most crazy names for all their gear. Like, even the way they name guitar pedals, the Boss guitar pedals, is just like, why? Why have you done that? Like, SD1 makes sense, but like calling your delay the DD6, like, what happened to the first five?
Yeah, it just makes it sound more evolved, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But Rolling Stone has said on this one, Rolling Stone Italy, legend has it that this device was confiscated at customs when the band landed in the United States, which is why Arcieri then took up the project again with the help of a technician called Eddie Ciletti, developing the first circuit bending that would feature in their discography. So they did this by modifying a Casio tone so they could obtain separate sounds and the timbre possibilities of a synth that appears gigantic when in fact it's little more than a toy. Officially, we could claim that micromusic as an applied science was born from this album. You ever seen circuit bent toys? It's a way that you can take like kids' little kind of farmyard animal samplers and stuff like that, and you can apply circuitry and circuit bend them. You can mod them to the point where you get all these fascinating parameters out of them that they're not designed to give. But sometimes you'll see little simple synth units with these random additional switches, quite often in weird places. The people that mod them like to get unusual, knobs and switches and digits and dials and stuff like that. And that's what circuit bending quite often does. It takes those simple circuits and you can start to like pitch them and add chorus and oscillators and stuff like that. And you can do quite a lot to it. So they were doing that with these really basic things quite early on. So yeah, as I said, they were kind of riding fairly high. Their career was in an upward trajectory. They've had this pop-air album. They've predated the Human League sound, and that could be really, really profitable for them if they stick with it. So they don't stick with it. And in 1982, they release an album called Clandestine Anticipation, which is an experimental album discussing water in all of its forms.
That is correct.
Including liquid, ice, vapour, fog, snow, and rain.
What?
Hey man, your witty question. Now, oh God, right. I'll start by reference to the first track, okay? Because the first track is
before you go
very significant.
They actually worked with Martin Hannett originally, Joy Division producer, OMD, but then they binned him for his heroin addiction.
No, really?
Yeah, got rid of him entirely.
Did not know that.
During the demoing process. Apparently they also permanently moved to London at this point, so they'd been in and around London for a while, but this is a permanent move this year. Some of their song videos were filmed in Bali. Did you know that, Indonesia?
I did know that actually, because
cool.
I've seen them.
It says here, the album pushes the Joe's electronic experimentation to extremes, featuring an almost techno style with dark atmospheres, and as a commercial flop.
I am not surprised this album was a commercial flop. However, and this is one of the ones that does and doesn't appear on certain lists and sites. The first track is called Miami, and we have to discuss it, right? Because this is a totally pioneering bit of electro.
It sounds like something from Kid A.
Exactly the note I've got here. It's so far ahead of its time. It's like it's down there as preempting a lot of IDM, intelligent dance music. The percussion and bass on it, as you say, feels like Kid A, Amnesiac era Radiohead, and actually on into Tom York's solo career. And there's no exaggeration there. It really does sound like that. I mean, this is a sound that even like groups like Autechre have been celebrated for. I can't shake the feeling that this record is actually really impressive. There's a lot of backwards looking art pop projects around now that are doing things to this day that sound a lot like this. And equally, some of the coolest nightclubs in Glasgow. So I don't know, events like So Low, which is JD Twitch and stuff like that, could and perhaps do slip some of these tracks into a set, and people would go nuts for it, absolutely nuts. The fourth one on it, Melon Arpo, would be a particularly good example of a kind of craftworky, propulsive beat, a really catchy minor key art that pushes its way at the top of the mix every so often. And it was on the back, because I did not expect that when I got to this. I thought, right, we'll do the deep dive in the discography. It'll be probably a lot of diminishing returns as they sort of stumble about looking for a new identity. I did not expect to encounter this record. It does seem to have a bit of a cult following, partly because the band, as we say, at the height of their commerciality, decided to abandon it and produce something so ahead of its time, but also so difficult. I mean, it would be a difficult listen for a lot of people now. It must have been a really difficult listen for people who were expecting a synth pop album, considering this is now a year after the Human League have just blown the doors off with a sound that this band were doing 2 years ago. According to Rolling Stone Italy, they put it as number 1 in their list, and it's safe to say there may actually be a case to answer for that I have picked the wrong album.
Yeah, this is the last one I listened to, because in Spotify it's actually released in 1995, which is wrong.
Yeah.
And to be fair, it could be released. It's so anachronistic.
I think some stuff got
yeah.
remastered though, and I think that's why there's varying release dates. Yeah.
But it's so anachronistic that it could have been released at any time in the past 30 years, and you would be like, when did this come out? The last 40 years, even. And yeah, like I thought Miami was really good. It's so close to modern dance music that I was totally blown away by.
But they've actually got a reprised version of it on a later album as well, which is sonically updated a wee bit. I'm not sure it's better though. I think this is a really, really good piece of music.
Other ones that I kind of enjoyed, I liked Samora Club. It's got a kind of Eastern feel to it.
That's pretty well known in their canon.
Yeah, pretty cool. Silly Europeans. Silly Europeans feels light years ahead of its time. Actually sounds like Burial in places. It's remarkable, frankly. And the song Water actually sounds like Ultravox. If Ultravox were less dramatic, it just leaned into the coldness of that kind of 80s synth sound. I'm probably go back and listen to this record again, to be honest.
I'll be honest, it's same here, and I'm actually, like I said, I did not expect to find this amidst their albums, especially again because when you look on different sources, their albums are not comprehensively listed, and it's really easy to miss this if you're not comparing the different chronologies and discographies. So make an effort to hear this. It's really good. I can't say for sure. I'll maybe decide in my conclusion, but this would have been a real contender for the Unsung Classic. There's something really special about this record, and it's incredibly overlooked. As you say, it's a total flop. It's not even listed in a lot of places. It's it's pretty amazing, actually. I wonder what they thought when Radiohead brought out Kid A, by the way.
Yeah, wild.
That must have been galling. The band moved to New York City permanently, or full time, to live there in 1986, and apparently spent some time as part of Andy Warhol's inner circle.
It was in 82. They moved there in 82.
Was it 82? I thought
yeah, so basically they released an EP called Clandestine Anticipation as well, and they released a remix of Miami, a 12-inch. Atlantic Records released it, and then they signed an agreement for distribution for their records in America.
I knew they'd done that in 80. Yeah. All right, because the Atlantic thing was kind of came to the fore in 83 with an album called Nothing to Do with the Dog, which was then re-released and renamed Fido in the USA.
Yeah.
I mean, fucking hell, this is more what I expected to find in their
I've not heard this.
Their back catalogue, right?
It's not on Spotify.
Title track is really naff. It's got barking samples through it. Let's put it that way.
Nice.
The third track is called I Must Know Your Name, and it's much more interesting, minimalist and weirdly punky. That is a theme that runs through a lot of their stuff, maybe with the exception of the previous two. A sort of low-tech garage electro aesthetic. It does feel like they've done a lot of this stuff in their garage. And the second one is interesting because it's a cover of a 10cc song called I'm Not in Love. You know the one?
It's a good song.
So this included a video as well, but it's very grim. Like, it's really minor key. It's really sinister. I mean, I know the original is kind of minor, but this goes dark and it's sinister. The video also features the band being intercut with footage of men being like shipped off to war. It's pretty grim stuff. So the 86, sorry, the number I had earlier on, the album.
Hang on, sorry.
Oh, you're going to comment on this?
Yeah, so that it was actually at this point when their Krismino was, when they were moving to America. That's when it was
seized. Yeah.
So it was a Casio Tone MT65 synthesizer they used for the entire record because their actual gear was gone. I haven't listened to it, but I imagine that probably limits the sonic qualities of the record quite substantially compared to their other stuff.
Casio tones are very sought after these days, but yeah, there's only so much you can do with them.
Yeah, there's some interesting detail on this record about its Italian release. It's called, like you said, Nothing to Do with the Dog.
Nothing to do with the dog.
Yeah.
Who the fuck?
Apparently,
unless that's some weird Italian idiom that is just not translating. I'll ask my gran.
So they released
next time I get a Ouija board.
CGD, their label in Europe at the time, was uninterested in the record, and then they later sued the band for breach of contract, which basically resulted in the label retaining all of the royalties on Chrisma's records that they owned, and that's still the case to this day.
Right.
But due to their limited size compared to Atlantic, like that record receives very little promotion in Italy, goes largely unnoticed despite very positive reviews in America at the time, and apparently it's got very poor sound quality, the ones that were released in Italy as a result, because the label was much smaller. It's considered more difficult and less commercial than previous albums due to its experimental nature and single instrument composition.
Yeah. It's not the best. It does seem sparse and twee, and it's a bit naff. 86, they brought out a record called Iceberg. This was Rolling Stone Italy's least favourite of the canon of their studio albums. They call it the least innovative. Interestingly, they point out that at this point it felt like Chrisma were sort of aping their peers rather than leading. They'd previously almost always been ahead of the game, and now they were sort of just following the trends. It is a bit crap. It's kind of third division Europop.
Totally. It's got the atmospheric-y stuff. It's kind of modelling in places. It's ballady in places.
Yeah, the third track, Fritz Cavallo, is a pretty good example of unremarkable synth pop. There are some... They obviously know what they're doing, so there's some really fun sounds in the mixes.
Totally.
But the songs are just pretty garbage. The sixth one, Iceberg, has a sort of really entertaining blend of 80s pop or maybe even hip hop and industrial sounds. I can really imagine it popping up in maybe the closing credits of a kind of corny film from the 80s. And it does also make use of, what's that James Bond trope where it goes da 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 da.
Oh,
remember the name of that?
Yeah, I can't remember the name of that. We spoke about it a lot.
So they throw that in, and I think they throw it in quite knowingly as well.
It's a tone because it's just repeating. And Hans Zimmer uses it all the time.
Yep. So you have to go and listen to our Bond episodes, and so will we.
Evidently.
But yeah, and then after that, the 1989 Nono Denaro. I have no money.
Yeah.
The Rolling Stone take on this one's quite interesting, actually. I think it's just dross. But Rolling Stone thinks it deserves a partial reappraisal for musical bravery. However, the album was actually released by the label without permission. Tracks were unfinished, and it was all wrapped up in some truly shitty artwork. So the band were never on board. Hence, it doesn't appear on things like streaming. So this is another moment where, like, their discography, depending on where you're looking, can be totally different. Christina particularly hated it, and it understandably so, given that some of her vocals sound honestly no better than drunken karaoke. The record was apparently withdrawn shortly after being released, and so copies are like hen's teeth. So if you do go bin diving and you find the Chrisma record, Nono Denaro, with the terrible artwork, then grab that vinyl, because you will be able to flog that to some Italian obsessive.
Yeah, there's apparently, I don't know if this is true, but there's a record called Bandito Favorito.
Yeah.
This
is the fourth song.
Was that ever released?
Well, this is was it released as a single? Because
maybe that was the original title for the record.
It's the fourth track on here, and actually it's one of the only ones I've picked out because it does again mix kind of classic hip hop sounds, and it's got some Latin guitar in it as well.
Yeah, they were basically convinced by they joined a label called Bollicine, and they were convinced to release that song as a single. But the album at the time was called that. They've obviously changed the name of it, or the name has been changed at some point.
Okay, that song is excusable. It's not bad. It's kind of fun of its time.
It killed the band for like the next 12 years though. It just vanished.
Yeah, so they released a single called Cara, Kara, in 2001, and they also collaborated with Subsonica for the hit song New Obsession, or Nuova Ossessione, in 2002. When they say hit song, they mean in Italy. Because I did not recognise it at all. And they do that thing where there's a TV, it's a band playing a song and there's a TV in the video, and this band, the Krisma, appear on the TV. They obviously couldn't fly them out to the actual filming sessions. But yeah, that was 2002, and then things got weird, because I thought that was it, right? But no, that's not it.
Yeah, they released a couple more records.
So fucking else, and my goodness, these records. So
I listened to a little bit of one of them and I was like, what?
Right, so 2008, and I didn't know this until today, because again, partial discographies all over the shop. I find out there's 2 records here in 2008, Emo, Euro, Emo, right?
Just on Spotify.
It was on Spotify, which is a collection of like out and out Eurodance instrumentals, like written by Maurizio using a specific piece of software called Rebirth. In the preceding decade, he'd just been like dabbling, pottering away with this software, putting these things together. There's an interesting detail here, because around this time, 2008, the band had caused an uproar among fans because they'd been touring in Italy with a show of 2 halves, and the first half of the show was a set of Christina singing over full backing tracks of the classic tunes, and I mean full backing tracks, including the original vocals most of the time, right? And people were fuming. So it was obviously karaoke. We've talked about, entrance doing things like that, right?
It's fine if that's what you're going to, if that's what you know you're going for. You know what I mean? But if you're not, then you're raging.
Maurizio was there. They were just playing the backing track, and she was doing karaoke, including singing over her own voice sometimes. And then the second half of the set was just Maurizio doing this, wheeling out acid techno and honestly blasting people's heads off while Christina just danced. And everybody talks about how awkward it was. It's just really weird for not thinking witness.
Half an hour of her just dancing while she just, and she's like in her 60s by this point, so it's like dead weird. Probably.
Rolling Stone had it last on their list, and they pointed out that it's more of a curio for long-term fans, or indeed for people who are dropping an eckie in the house. But it is curious that it's not mentioned on their English language wiki at all. But it did make it on to at least one streaming service.
Yeah, it's on Spotify. There's also another record they released that year.
So unlike the next one, Opera Punk.
That's on Spotify as well, but it's listed as a single.
Right, but it's not. It's a fucking album.
It's not. It's got 8 tracks. It's totally
2008 came out just after Emo, Euro, Emo. Self-produced. Both of them were self-produced. I would liken this to being a Bad Trip counterpart to the predecessor. Christina doesn't sing in this, she's just sampled on this one really quite harshly at points. It's almost GABA in places, and it uses all these really crunchy, noisy, real world samples, especially this very honky bass tone. It's a very intense listen. I'm also a wee bit of a fan. It was compared by Rolling Stone Italy to Lou Reed's Metal Machine Music.
Oh God.
In terms of, as being somewhat above a simple kind of good bad appraisal, given the extremity of the artistic statement that's on it. I mean, for example, the second track in it is called, I think it's the second track, Icky Ticky. It reminds me a wee bit of a project called One Speed Bike. It was a very good project by, I think the guy's name's Aiden from Godspeed You Black Emperor, in terms of just taking all these analog sounds and drum samples and kind of chopping and screwing them into something that's quite industrial and tribal.
Yeah.
It's really quite a good record. Again, totally taken aback. I was like, this is pretty cool. I thought this was going to be a joke, but it's actually quite fascinating. I much prefer it to the Emo, Euro, Emo, because that just does sound like pure out-of-the-box Euro techno stuff, whereas this is a lot weirder and more obtuse and angry and just uncomfortable.
You do get a sense that they were very taken by the Velvet Underground, so
Aye.
like doing something like Metal Machine Music would be totally within the brief of the band,
I think they
off
just
the wall.
They like messing with the limitations of what people have determined they're capable of.
It's kind of what the Velvet Underground did, and Lou Reed did that throughout his
Yeah.
entire career, you know.
So after that, the only other thing to talk about it very briefly is Hibernation, they haven't a wee joke yet, Chybernation from 2011, which is effectively a tribute album
Yeah.
of other bands covering them, but then there are some live versions of them playing their own stuff in it. It's a bit of an odd
When
concept.
did they play that live?
So and both members of the band have since passed away. I think
Mhm.
Christina was reasonably recently.
About 2015, yeah.
Yeah. So that just leaves Chinese Restaurant. The
First record,
main
1977.
focus here, 1977, made third place in Rolling Stone's list. You know, again, as I say, Ferruccio turns me into a lot of these kind of weird European niche records that I've missed over here in our London-centric music industry. But I actually don't think I got this from him. I do recall that one of the first time I stopped to check this out was to do with the weird cover image.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've got this on vinyl over there. It's a photo of the two members in front of, you can guess it, a Chinese restaurant, which I think looks like it might be in Soho. I mean, they were living in London at the time, and it looks like part of that kind of like network of Chinese places down in Soho, the Chinatown. Love walking about there, love a scran. But it's one of those ones where they've got the grills in the window that you like hang roast duck from
Aye.
and stuff, but there's no food in the actual window. It's a very odd image for the cover. It's the back of the two of them. It's a strangely cool picture with the way
Mhm.
that the big flash is bouncing off the glass and
Yeah.
stuff. In an odd way, I do kind of get why they used it, even though it seems quite counterintuitive.
It's quite punk rock.
It is quite
you
punk,
know?
but it's also their first album, and you would think you'd have saved up a more striking image,
Mhm.
but no, they went with that. As I said earlier on, you can immediately hear the impact on this record that living in England in the midst of the punk explosion has had. You know, you compare those first two porno pop singles from Italy to this, it's night and day. As we mentioned, they teamed up with the Papathanasiou brothers, aka Vangelis and his bro Nico. As we said as well, he adds uncredited synths throughout the course of this album. There are bits of like the band Suicide in the sound, except in saying that, Suicide's debut album wasn't even around at this point. There may be both one of those situations where both sets of artists are mining the same vein
Mhm.
of krautrock inspiration, because there's a lot of krautrock in this as well. Rolling Stone Italy again puts them up alongside the likes of Throbbing Gristle for sheer invention at this stage, and said that, as I mentioned, despite the fact they were kind of over there on a sort of fact-finding mission, this interloping Italian married duo did cause a bit of a stir on the English punk scene and the London live scene at the time, because they were good, and they certainly have stage presence.
Mhm.
Christina's bold as brass, and Maurizio's kind of a fun guy. He's obviously a bit of a character, as we say. So in terms of the tunes, without being super exhaustive,
Mhm.
we've got a bit of a bookend thing happening here with the track Thank You.
Yeah.
So we start with Thank You. I love the melodic progression of this tune and the arrangement. The theremin that they use in it is 10 out of 10 for me. And the exact same track bookends the album at the end, albeit just the melodrama of this tune just it is kind of at odds with all the other things in between it.
Mhm. Yeah. It's very 70s sounding with the synths. I can actually tell you which ones were they used in it if you want to know.
Okay, go for it. I'm sure somebody will want to know.
Yeah, so apparently they used a Yamaha, a CS30 Yamaha synth to imitate
Famous.
that theremin sound, and a Polymoog as well. And the reason that Italian Wikipedia says that Vangelis wasn't credited is because he was seeking a career as a composer with Deutsche Grammophon. So it would have probably been
Deutsche?
Deutsche Grammophon.
Oh, like
yeah.
German? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So that probably is a contractual thing as to why he couldn't be, because he apparently is very heavily involved in writing the first two songs, like You and Amor, even though they sound nothing like this. Anyway, this sounds like Vangelis in places because they're obviously using, like I said, his synths because they're in his studio. I like the way they layer the synths and how they create a melody from the lead synth, using that theremin thing.
I would love to hear a band do a Doom cover of this.
Yeah.
Because see that main riff is so like the chord changes are so powerful. I would love to hear a big, heavy, laden version of this.
One issue this record has is they don't know how to end songs.
Yeah. Oh, it just falls off a cliff. Like you
And
can
this is
the thing is as well. It doesn't all end at the same time. It's like they switch the drum machine off, then you can hear them switch the keyboard
Aye.
off, and then it's
this ends the way this ends. It feels like a mistake, like somebody's made a mistake.
The thing is, it's a bit odd at the end of the first track. However, see when it reprises, I like it as the ending to the album because the album just sounds like somebody's just turned it off bit by bit, and that's actually quite nice. But it doesn't work quite as well when it's followed by a tune, and it's followed by a really standout tune by this band, Black Silk Stocking, which does a lot of the lifting, maybe for why this album has had so many repeated plays for me and why I think of it so fondly. It's a proper belter of a late 70s single, weirdly sexy, really obtuse. I think it sounds really out of time in the sense that there are, again, bands now trying their hardest to do something vaguely as cool as this. It's a brilliant track. It works great when you DJ it. Speaking from experience, people will like come up to you and go, "What is this? This is fucking brilliant."
Yeah. The distorted guitar on it is so crushed.
The backwards
and
one.
Lo-fi, yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're using a PV Bandit, and if you've ever been in a practice studio as a teenager, probably even now, you know what a PV Bandit sounds like.
Much sought after amplifiers these days.
Yeah, they are, because it's like Josh Hobbs' favourite amp. I think they've actually remade it for him, and they're now selling it again. The whole vibe of the song is really cold and detached feeling, which I really quite like, and it does feel ahead of its time. It actually foreshadows a lot of the gothic post-punky stuff that would come in the 80s.
Yeah.
But
there was also that
great hook as well.
That whole kind of like early 2020s sort of, again, Lundo-centric Sprechgesang stuff that we talked about with, what was that band, fucking Washing Machine or something, Dry Cleaning, that kind of thing, where it's like sort of trying to be super cool and recreate some of that 70s minimalism with a bit of krautrock. This does it all brilliantly. It's a really, really, really good song, and one that is a really good way to kind of introduce people to the band as well.
Yeah.
The third one on it, Lola, pretty different. It's similar to a bunch of the 60s pop tracks, and I think I get the impression it's almost certainly a kind of composition that Maurizio and or Vangelis have had lying around from earlier imagined directions that they've sort of revisited in a different way. It manifests here amidst a bunch of cold synths and percussion that's soaked in plate reverbs. And the Spanish guitar solo in it is really unexpected, but somehow doesn't actually feel incongruous.
I know it's that flamenco guitar is a weird touch, but it actually really does work.
Yeah.
It's a nicely composed song. There's layers of keys which are quite unobtrusive, simple percussion, weird warbly synths.
Yep.
But everything occupies a really nice, distinct space in the mix, which is what makes it a really interesting and fun listen, I think. It just kind of stops though, and as I've said here, I hope the fact it can't quite end a song doesn't become a theme, but actually it does.
It does, yeah.
It's like it does.
So C Rock, mentioned it earlier on, they've got R Rock in a later album. C Rock, the fourth track, proper jaunty krautrock stuff here. This sits really well alongside bands like Noi, so if you're into Noi, give this a blast. The fifth one, What For? This is an unexpected, quite saturated tub thumper. It sounds like the Stooges recording direct into a desk.
It does.
I can totally understand why Fario loves this one, because I wouldn't be surprised if Cut did an absolutely killer version of this.
Yeah, it does sound like the Stooges, I thought, or maybe with echoes of the Velvet Underground as well. They actually get compared to the Velvet Underground in NME when this record came out.
Okay.
But yeah, no, it's a cool song, and it does have this really grimy sounding, you know?
Yeah, it is. Number 6, Wanderlust. Cool, weird, slacker, new wave stuff. Sonically, it's quite reminiscent of early 2000s bands like Akara Cult. And actually, the lyrical approach in it reminded me of Julian Casablancas. And then actually, I was like, you know what? The song just sounds a bit strokesy.
Yeah.
There's something about the delivery in it as well.
I thought it had a kind of Bowie-esque vocal energy, which kind of makes sense when you mentioned bands like that. I could actually imagine Bowie singing something like this. The guitar sound again is super crushed, but the bass is the best thing on it. The bass has got so many.
There's a lot of DI'd guitar in this, man. You can hear that fuzziness to it. Yeah,
but this is when I started to realise that every single song on this record is like a little island on its own. You know, there's no theme that's going through it really. It just is. Here's a song. Here's a song.
That's what I was saying. Where their MO is that their albums are kind of patchy, and what you really want is just a good collection of good songs, but there's not really a unifying theme. up until maybe that concept album about the water.
Yeah.
Yeah. The seventh one, Lycee, is really interesting, big, atmospheric, epic. It's almost 8 minutes long.
Got Vangelis all over it, man.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, he's got a big hand in this one. It reprises some of the earlier themes in the record. You know, for example, the theremin sounds. A lot of familiar synth tones come in, which I guess I agree with you. Musically, there's not a lot connecting these songs, but they do reuse elements that at least make them feel like they're on the same album.
Mhm.
And yeah, there's some really great space age chord changes in this one as well.
Mhm. Yeah. I think the vocals are fine. The keyboard melody, which kind of follows the vocals, and it's quite obvious, but between those bits, there's like this really lushness, this lush bloom to it, which I love. It's like those. I imagine the song is when they're singing and it's kind of monochrome, and then the big blooms happen and it becomes just bursts into color, and it comes back in. They kind of build up more drums and like big toms and stuff towards the end, which is a really cool way of changing things up. And then they bring in a kick drum, which makes you kind of think they're going to go into like a dance banger, but they never do.
No.
It's a really interesting song. It kind of subverts everything else they've done on the record, and it just disintegrates at the end. And this is one of the songs where having no ending kind of works.
Yeah.
It just falls apart.
Yeah, they cover a lot of bases. The eighth one, Montoya, kind of covers another. It's likeable, kind of upbeat, but it's the most forgettable for me. I think it's my least favourite on the record. And then, as we said, they finish on Thank You again, the exact same song in the exact same way. There's a possibility that the ending might be ever so slightly different, but I'd have to sit and obsess over that. But I love that track, and it's a weird idea to do a song at the start and at the end, but it kind of works.
Yeah.
Yep. So I said my conclusion here is a little bit unwritten. I'm very comfy that this is the right choice of band. I was really pleased actually when we told Ferruccio and he just about jumped out his chair. I also think that this is their most enjoyable album, and that's kind of evidenced by the fact that I've gone back to it quite a lot. You know, I've got it on record, and it's probably one of the vinyls that I play the most. As I said, I wasn't actually aware of Clandestine Anticipation prior to researching this, and I have to admit to being very impressed by that. Reading other perspectives around that, it's sort of compounded that impression, and I could completely understand if there's folks listening, watching, that are like, nah, Chris, you took the normie choice. Clandestine is the one. There's a very strong argument to be made there, but I think I'll stick with this one. Just really making sure that they're on the board here, that they're represented by us, is probably enough, because I think it's a very interesting project. I think they suffered from, I know they moved to London, but they were always kind of considered an Italian band, and I think that lack of geostasis, that like, oh, they're in the London movement, they're in this movement, I think that probably hampered them a bit, but there's some great stuff in their back catalogue, some really interesting highlights, and at least 2 albums that I think are very worth your time. Fario says 4.
Yeah, they were an interesting band to get into. Their career goes in very different directions, which the albums that I heard, and apparently even more directions from the ones that I didn't spend a lot of time with, because I'm not, on streaming services. It's a cool record, I think I'll probably go back to Clandestine though, to be honest, because it feels like it maybe has more to offer me than this does.
See, if you're listening to this and you're someone that, I know a few of the listeners are musicians in their own right, and if you mess around with industrial and noise stuff at home, listen to opera punk as well. I think you will genuinely like it. There's something very rough and honest about it, but I think there's actually a lot going on there that has been overlooked as well.
Excellent. Okay, well, next week we have a guest.
Resurrected?
No.
Oh, not yet.
Not yet.
Getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, sorry.
Got a guest the week after.
We've got 2 guests coming up in the next couple of weeks. The first one is not resurrected.
But fucking cue at the door.
I know. Joe will be joining us to talk about Immortal Technique. Which is the first time we've done a hip punk record in, I think, years.
A hip hop?
Yeah, sorry, a hip hop record, sorry.
Yeah, I was like, we've done plenty of punk
hip hop record in years. Really looking forward to that. That'll be good. And then, after that, peace be upon him, David comes back. You'll get to see Dave's face in the flesh.
When David comes back to the podcast, he just rises you know that way that vampires stand up, where they don't bend their knees, they just like literally just like stand up.
That's Dave all
That's
over.
it. That's how Dave
Um,
makes his way at the podcast. But he's coming here to to do a Kerrang cover
Correct,
mic.
yeah, Refuse Music.
Refuse music,
Um,
curated by Casey Chaos of
yeah.
Amen.
God rest his soul. He's actually dead.
So that's 2 weeks away.
Yeah. So and a few cool things coming up. We'll also
Yeah, as promised, we're going to be getting Fario back on
Mhm.
to do a mixtape, which is going to really test Mark to his very limits, I
Yeah,
think.
doing a mixtape of a genre I know nothing about.
Yeah,
that
anti-rock.
I can't pick a record from
The
because
anti-rock mixtape.
Mhm.
You can go and work out what that is, or some people maybe already know. But yeah, there's a number of things scheduled. If you're thinking these guys sound like they've actually got organised, then
we have.
actually got
Yeah.
organised.
And there's
So,
another really good bit of news that's going to be coming hopefully next week. The reason we haven't revealed it is because there's a few things up in the air, but
moving parts.
a dream's coming true maybe for us, hopefully soon. So yeah, that'll be good. Yeah, so if you've enjoyed this episode, please, like I said earlier on, like, share, subscribe. If you want to support us, you can join us on Patreon. It's patreon.com/unsungpod, or you can hit the link in the description below if you're on the YouTubes.
Yeah, there's 2 levels to the Patreon, by the way. The first one is just a basic one. You get bonus episodes, you get early access, you get no adverts, you get to join the AAA group on Facebook. Yes, it's Facebook, but it's good. It's good patter,
Mhm.
and you can influence the episodes that we cover by suggesting things. The higher version on Patreon actually brings you into the record club, and we curate and buy records from bands all over the world that you're almost certainly never going to hear otherwise, because they're kind of under the radar bands that we really believe you'll enjoy, and overwhelmingly the people that are part of that love it. So consider that. So we treat to yourself, plus you're funding us and the bands we buy from them directly and their labels directly, so the money goes to them and not to shitehawks like Spotify. So yeah, give that a thought as well.
Yep. So yeah, do all those things. That'd be really cool. Thank you very much for listening. If you're watching us on YouTube, you'll find an episode right here, which you'll really enjoy. It's probably going to be
Is it going to be right there?
right here.
Right,
Yep.
Okay.
It's probably going to be Arnold Michaelis because we spoke about it earlier on. So yeah, you
Aye.
can listen to his first part of his interview of 4 right here.
And turn the red down so I'm a bit less ruddy faced, because otherwise I'm just going to start wearing a bag over my head.
Yeah, please do that. But yes, thank you for listening and watching. Bye.